Welcome to Bible Study for Progressives, a show where moderates, liberals, and leftists of all faiths and ideologies come together to discuss scripture, spirituality, and politics. So let's open it up for questions. So I got one from Dorothy. Okay, so there you
Hi,
go.
Bill. So I was just saying that I've been missing your writing on Tooth Dig, and I'm hoping that you're going to be writing for SheerPost now.
I just had a piece out about the Manhattan DA's case. It's on Salon, it's on Bill Moyers, it's on Alternate, it's on a variety of
I'll
different...
have to just Google you
Yeah, I
and
think
look
that's
through
a
your
good
stuff.
Sure.
Because I send out a newsletter every day with links to articles.
Okay.
But I came in late, so I don't know. Did you mention the threat for March 4th?
I didn't cover March 4th. I don't think any of us talked about March 4th. March 4th is the day when the president used to be inaugurated before the 20th Amendment. And these QAnon people think that it's the touchstone, that it is the signal for a new storm, right? So it's something to look out for and be aware of.
They're also threatening the State of the Union. The new police chief said that they can't take down any barricade or send any National Guard home because they're threatening to come in and kill Congress people during, for the State of the Union message.
Right.
All right, thank you, Dorothy. Okay, Professor Joseph Dowd.
Hello. So my question is one that I guess is important to me as a university instructor and an academic. Maybe I don't keep up with this stuff as much as some other people here, but I do know that polls are showing that there's or not polls, other data showing that there's been a real shift or an acceleration of a shift in terms of party affiliation in this country, where more and more people who are college educated tend to be Democrats, and more people who are not college educated tend to be Republicans. And it's easy for progressives or liberals of any kind to be kind of smug about that, right? Of course, because we're the smart ones, right? So of course, college educated people would go for us, and dumb people would go for Republicans. But I find this incredibly worrisome. And certainly, if you're any kind of progressive, you care about the interests of people who are perhaps less educated, perhaps lower class. And also, my question is kind of, what do we do about that? Because I think it partly contributes to, the rise of conspiracy theories and fake news on the right. It may, to some extent. I think much more worrisomely, one thing that's going on is, that the people who were responsible for the insurrection at the Capitol, yes, they were attacking democracy, but another layer of that is that they perceived themselves to kind of represent this kind of silent majority of true Americans, right? And whether they were right about that is irrelevant. They perceive themselves that way, and they perceive themselves as confronting basically liberals who just didn't represent that silent majority, and whom they simply could not relate to. And I think that kind of problem will get worse as kind of the educational divide between left and right grows. So I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are on that, and what we can do about that.
You want to take that, Bill, or
No, I think Alan would be best for that.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of that. First of all, I do want to point out that the Democratic Party, again, before the rise of the Sanders movement and the strengthening of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, did very little to protect American democracy in any proactive way. at least from 2000, when we had basically a stolen election, right, in Florida. I mean, in any other country in the world, we would have had in the American press, this was stolen in the candidate's brother's, state, where the person counting the votes was one of his chairs of his election in the state, Catherine Harris, if you remember it all. And there was Al Gore gaveling down the basically Black Caucus objecting to a stolen election, and very little was done. You even had you'd get sometimes candidates challenged from the Clintonite mainstream wing of the party, and they would confess they didn't want to really emphasize this because it would discourage people from voting. Was their defense of it. And it wasn't really until Trump's victory and the whole brouhaha about Russian interference, you actually got the balance of the Democratic Party across the country actually weighing in with pro-democracy advocates, of which an organization like PDA and the other rest of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party has always been, against Citizen United. These have been movements been driven by the progressive left. And it really wasn't until the 2016 election that you saw any movement from the mainstream of the Democratic Party to support democracy. Now, you ask a question about the support for the Republican Party by, what did Donald Trump once say? I love the poorly educated. One of the wisest commentaries I heard about the 2020 election was from a radical commentator named Gerald Horne on a show around the time of the conventions. And it was said with sort of a gleeful cynicism. We know how the election is going to turn out. It's going to come down to a handful of states. It's going to be super close. In 35 to 40 to 44 of the states, there won't really be close elections. So everything will be focusing on these particular states. Everybody who's honest with themselves about it knows it's going to go this way. Now, there was a time with the 6 weeks leading up to November where people thought the Democrats would do substantially better than they ended up doing, and it wouldn't be that close. But Gerald Horne turned out to be right. It was razor thin in a certain set of states. And it came down to turnout of this constituency. And if this national constituency was 1 or 2% higher or 1 or 2% lower, it was going to swing the election. And he honed in on exactly which constituents. And, it's like a book you could read in advance. Okay, so where are these constituents that are turning to the Republican Party when the Democratic Party is still claiming to be more of a party in support of the working class than the Republican Party is? And I do believe it is. I don't think it's as egregiously horrible for the working class as the Republican Party. But let's also be honest, it's basically been crap for the working class. And so you can't really blame the American working class for not being enthusiastic about the economic policies of the Democratic Party. And even now, where what's laid out by the Biden administration and House and Senate leadership is pretty decent, it doesn't look like much of it's really ever going to get through. The hope here is that, I think the relief package is decent, but it's not noticeably grandly better like what Roosevelt did in 1933 for the American people than what's come before. It's not a game changer like that, nor is it a game changer like Reagan sort of provided in the other direction in 1980. Joe Biden says he wants to do big. It's not that big. So here's the thing. If the Democratic Party can actually adjust to having the kind of incentives and national infrastructure project that's somewhat on the table, it's going to be put forward more in the Recovery Act that's going to come forward. If you can actually get a recharge of things like manufacturing. See, on either coast, manufacturing, for instance, is not a big political appeal as a subject matter. In the middle of the country and in the Rust Belt, it's a huge issue. The trade deals, which won Donald Trump the election, arguably, in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, right? Not that big a deal on either coast. Huge talking points in these places. So the Democratic Party has a chance right now, coming out of this crisis, to make the kinds of infrastructural investments in the now depleted Rust Belt states that could transform American politics if the working class is there, and a diverse working class can see investment that will really produce jobs in regions that are economically depressed. Those would be game changers. But that's incumbent upon a Democratic Party actually caring, really caring about the welfare other than their major donors. And I do believe the Sanders wing and the squad wing of the party, 100%, their heart's in it fully. The Clintonite DLC wing of the party, not so much. I do think that's really key. And I do think now the Democratic Party has learned its lesson around democracy. and we have to keep on them about it. But I do think they are now actively advocating for democracy. So winning elections, winning over the not well-educated working class people who've been swinging to the Republican Party is possible, especially if those jobs turn out to be union jobs.
Thank you, Alan. And I wanted to respond to Joseph's question because I think this is where the media also comes in. So basically, this is always there's a cult. It's like they have a cult of people with false beliefs, and some of these, and the hatred of liberals. This is almost a religious cult. And so what we need is to deprogram. And that's one reason why I'm kind of hesitant to use words like fascist or Christian Nazi, because these things put us into conflict, and conflict is not what you need to deprogram people. So I blame the church. I blame the church for not providing a more persuasive and powerful theology that would keep these people out of idolatry and false prophecy. So the church is having a difficulty with all this misinformation and disinformation that's being spread by their members, and it's going to be their responsibility to identify this stuff as idolatry and as false prophecy. And so that's one way that we can go, but we have to recognize that these people are so entrenched that just yelling at them is going to make them go the other direction. So we need to find some other way to communicate with these people. So Reverend Tom Eggebean, you had a comment or question? Let me ask you to unmute.
Well, hello, thank you. First of all, to Alan and Bill, many, many thanks. And Rich, thank you for putting all of this together. So many good things. My question is very, very simple. It's to Bill. He mentioned 9 steps, and I am so grateful for him putting this together. But on my notes, I have 8.
Okay.
I can tell you what I've written, so you don't have to go over all of them, or if you want to just quickly review them again, because I think they're terribly important.
All right, I'll list them. I have voter suppression, which reaches back into history.
Right.
During the campaign, election disinformation. Trump telling us that either he wins or there's fraud. There's packing the courts, which goes back to the start of Trump's administration. That's 3. 4, rhetoric and organizing after claiming victory or saying it was fraud. This is the Stop the Steal movement. Number 5, lawsuits to overturn the results. Number 6, pressure the states to get them to overturn their own results. Number 7, target Pence with an eye towards January 6th. Number 8 is the insurrection itself, which was long in planning. And number 9, the goal is to put this election in the hands of the House so that we can have a repeat, not of Bush v. Gore, but of 1876, Tilden versus Hayes.
That's a very important point. And by just for myself, I had conflated 8 and 9, and I hadn't distinguished them as you, which rightly did. Mentioning the end of quote unquote the end of Reconstruction. I've been reading a book by a gentleman by the name of Eric Foner called The Second Founding, and these elements have been present in the American DNA since the beginning, shall I say. And what's been so interesting about Foner's books is in the power of victory, shall I say, after the Civil War, with the passage of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. But it was the Supreme Court in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s that basically gutted all of these amendments. And one of the observations he had was how the 14th Amendment was grabbed by corporate interests, and the majority of lawsuits that came to before the Supreme Court were about corporations now being eligible for the same rights, privileges, and protections that individuals were. And in some ways, I'm very much grateful for how you identified these 9 steps. But in a sense, the forerunner of all of this was in Reconstruction and the efforts of racists, white supremacists, Christians of various sorts, Rich, and big business to undo the whole darn shebang. Anyway, my
Absolutely.
thanks.
That was when we talk about voter suppression, when we talk about Jim Crow, I put that all into step 1. I mean, you could have many, many more steps, but your focus on the Supreme Court and its work as an anti-democratic institution is spot on, culminating in Plessy versus Ferguson, and economically in Lochner versus New York, which establishes this freedom of contract that trumps, not to use a bad word there, all other rights of working people. So it's a long, hard struggle to get the court to recognize democratic rights and to defend them and extend them. And we had an interregnum, if you will, with the Warren Court and an expansion of human rights. That's the exception in American legal history. That's not the rule.
I will ask just one question, and everybody can weigh in on it. FDR wanted to enlarge the court. I'm not so sure that's the answer, but there are parts of me that sometimes think maybe that would help. I'd appreciate any commentary on the possibility of enlarging the court.
Well, I'll just offer a brief answer and then I'll turn it back to everybody else. The number of justices is not fixed by the Constitution, and it has varied throughout the decades. So you could change it by act of Congress. If you succeed in doing that, then you invite retaliation. That's the argument against it.
Okay, very, very good. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. We have 4 people in line. So Dorothy.
So I'll answer this question first. I'm very scared about the Supreme Court because what I think is we do not add people to the Supreme Court. When we pass a law, it's going to get challenged in Texas or someplace. We're gonna lose the case. It's going to get bumped up eventually to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will decide that this law is unconstitutional. And these Republicans are ruthless that way. They could do it to HR 1 for God's sakes. So I think we don't really have a choice about that. I was going to say a couple other things. First of all, I hope you all know about Vote Common Good, which is a group of evangelicals who are trying to counter the Trump evangelicals. If you don't know about them, I can get a link for you. They've been going all around the country, and they've been on this case for a couple of years now.
All right. Thank you, Dorothy. Yeah, I wanted that Plessy v. Ferguson case, Bill, that's the case where it said that a black person is 3/5 of a white person. Is that right?
No, that's Dred Scott. But Plessy is separate but equal.
Separate but equal.
Separate equal. Okay, very good. All right. Dan.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you very much for Alan for inviting me today. I'm from Middle America, so I grew up in a conservative family, conservative part of the country, and I know how a lot of these people think. And yeah, I think many people have not recovered from the 2008 crisis, and now there's 2 more exasperating each other, and that, in my view, which is why I was not surprised at all that a group formed and stormed the Capitol. I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen sooner, to be honest with you. I mean, people are frustrated, economically, and I think since Occupy Wall Street, I think we have needed a movement, an economic-based movement, but that first is going to require bringing coalitions of people together. I mean, progressives are going to have to not necessarily agree on everything, because we don't, but find ways of common ground, come together and create coalitions, because it really is a working class thing. And there are a lot of conservative working class people that I know that probably voted for Trump. They were going to vote for Bernie, many of them. And they're focused on their economic lives. That's what they're focused on. And they don't want to lose their health care, especially if it gets tied to their jobs, which they lose, which is, you can't find that anywhere else in the world. We have the most, and I just can speak from personal experience in the last couple of months, we have an extraordinarily dysfunctional healthcare system as far as the administrative part. So I think we need a movement, and we need to need to make demands. And I know a lot of what's in the original Green New Deal from the Green Coalition of 2007, and there are definitely solutions in that, including Medicare for all, including a stimulus for people in a transition period, because we have to transition not only the energy systems, but the whole infrastructure of everything in society, socially and environmentally, and everything. And that's going to require some political will. And I'm working on creating coalitions. I do a lot of work with DSA-LA, and do have a media show that broadcasts it around the world now, streaming on the internet, Roku and Apple TV and Fire TV now too. So I want to do whatever I can. And I would put that out to the group. What about working on creating coalitions as PDA to address these issues with an economic-based movement that everyone should be able to connect to, at least in the 99.9%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And that's one of the things that I want to do, is start a Truth and Democracy coalition in which we are fighting these struggles, both with the confronting the propaganda and fighting for our democratic rights and protecting the vote and all of that. So we've got some plans going ahead, and we appreciate having you. All right. Next up, human rights activist, French human rights activist, all the way from England, please.
So my first point, what I really want to say, because it's a pod on democracy, is that for me, Trump embodies plutocracy. And this could, for me, is where the fight here. I wanted to ask you a question, because you are a journalist. We talk a lot about fake news, and very understandable, because they may be everywhere. It's very threatening, in fact, because even when you are trying to be informed, try to recoup sources, and takes a hell of a time, and it's very unsettling. Me, I really admit. But what shocks me even more is the lack of information, in fact, because we are also surrounded by terrible topics such as human trafficking and so forth. So just as the lack of information, I would say, or trigger against, for example, the fact that we are losing species and so forth. And I think that if you are not voluntary and actively searching for information, this is not really in the air. I mean, for example, we've got Murdoch that has got a total monopoly on the press, and that we know that is now famous denier of climate change and so forth. So, the question is, as journalists, free is the press? I know that, for example, in France, people are really, really worried about less and less fundings for journalism. So less and less possibility for investigation. Also, and this in France, in country where you would think that these people are kind of protected. Today, it's very, you put yourself in a dire danger just releasing some information against corporation, for example. Famously, journalists and whistleblowers face trials with as sanction, like thousand and thousand value of pounds or euros for the fine. I mean, how comfortable are you with handling information, by the way?
All right. Bill, do you have an answer for that? Because I know journalism is a very dangerous profession, and journalists are being killed right now. And that's part of the attack on truth. and it's part of the attack on democracy. And so
this is a huge topic.
Yes.
I first of all, journalists have to be protected. No question about it. As far as promoting truth goes, I think it depends on how you go about that. I don't want to see government in the position of determining what's true and what's not true in the United States, because depending upon what government you have, you're going to suppress and tamp down the opposing point of view. Having said that, I think that the kind of suppression that I see in the United States comes less from government than it does from the big private mainstream media carriers themselves. And it's a sort of suppression that is one of, we're just not going to publish your ideas because we don't think your ideas are well developed. We don't think your ideas are important, or we don't think a particular author is a particularly good writer. I think that's starting to change a little bit, but I think one way that we counter disinformation is the promotion of independent media. And I think that there is a big appetite for independent media, but you are going to, and I mean places like Truthdig and like Salon and like Slate. There are plenty of places that do discuss ideas and do report on important topics. Another outlet would be ProPublica. I think they do great work. Truthout's another website that does terrific work. But we don't hear about them that much. I think that it's important for people to share those different sorts of websites together. But I'm not a fan of government-imposed restrictions on speech, except insofar as speech, crosses the line. We have this clear and present danger test. We have the imminent incitement to violence test, and those are going to come up in these sedition cases involving January 6th. Where does speech give way to a call for imminent violent action such that it no longer deserves constitutional protection? So these are all really very difficult questions. And I think that there are certain very good tools out there in the law now that have to be used better. And I would be open to hearing about new tools that can be created to promote truth. But I'm a civil libertarian when it comes to free speech. I belong to the ACLU. I've worked with the ACLU. I've been on cases with the ACLU when I was a lawyer. So I very much am committed to their idea of free speech. I do think we can do a lot to get money out of politics, because I think that perverts free speech in the context of elections. So there are things that we can do and things that we probably ought not to put a lot of energy behind. But I am a big proponent of independent media. I work with independent media, and the idea behind that is the best antidote to disinformation is information. And then it's a question of how you get the message out.
I very agree with you on free speech, because even for literature and so forth, yes, human has imagination, and why not? I mean, reality is complex and so forth. But it's not as such as freedom of press in saying that if someone managed to has a monopoly of press, which you said it, Rich, is a pillar of democracy, yes. And it's true. It's about information. Someone who would manage and who have a right to say that climate change doesn't exist. I mean, where you can draw the line? And I think this kind of manipulation of the truth, of the reality of what everything one can see and felt, everything that we can see it with our own eyes, and not it is denied. So where do you draw a line? And I think that what happened with Trump is that this government and this state and this structure, but yes, is supposed to defend people, at least, yes. I mean, never draw a line on what has been said and what has been done. I mean, I think that what politics do, but in 5 minutes of discourse, we know that they are lying, we know that they are hiding the realities on the ground and so forth, is giving blueprint to their people and just give boundaries on what it is possible to say or what it is possible to do, basically. If you deny what the industries and you can deny everything else. Yes,
all right,
it was not a freedom of expression question, type of question.
Thank you. Civitas, we have 3 other people in the queue. So Robin, go ahead and unmute yourself there.
Actually, my name is Robin Day, not Robin.
Robin Day. Okay, sorry. Hi, Robin Day. Sorry about that.
My sister is Robin.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Robin Day.
I want to give you a little bit of background so you can understand where I'm coming from. I'm a native New Yorker who grew up in an advertising publishing family. And my father was a winner of the Polk Award for opposing McCarthyism. Publishing was considered to be a noble profession in my family. What's left from all of that to me are 2 passions. One is that I really believe in freedom of the press. And although many of the issues are not clear cut, it's still a value that I think we need to preserve. And the other is that in my view, one of the most effective ways in which we can advance democratic and progressive values is through marketing. Now, I'm sure that some people in this group would use another term for that and call it diplomacy or persuasion. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just plain ordinary marketing. I think we need to figure out what our product is and then market it better. That's my view in a teacup.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, we need counter propaganda to counter the propaganda. So Mark, you're up next.
Well, this is addressing that issue of things that we can do to promote democracy. And I'm not sure, we may have already covered that issue. That ship may have sailed, but I heard some people talking about the Supreme Court. Rather than adding more justices to the Supreme Court, maybe we should set term limits of 10 years on the justices, or 15 or 20, some other limit on the term of service. So then you always have each president's 4-year term an opportunity to replace 1 justice, or perhaps 2. And then you eliminate the problem of justices being appointed to the bench for life, and then some of them serving for 30 or 35 years. And you also eliminate the problem of presidents trying to intentionally nominate younger justices who are less experienced to the Supreme Court, when you really should be nominating older ones that are more experienced and have them serve less time. Now, from a practical standpoint, how you would do that, it would involve changing the Constitution, I guess, and how we could do that, I don't really know. I mean, I do like the idea of the popular electoral vote compact with the states. That's certainly a good thing. But I believe the states decide how to allocate their electoral votes individually. Is that true? I think each state determines how they how they allocate their electoral votes. And at least two, Maine and New Hampshire, do not have an all or nothing system. They can actually have one or more electoral votes go to one candidate and the remaining votes go to a different candidate. So that just seems like a system we should institute in all 50 states. I mean, then you would have states like Michigan, Ohio, Georgia, maybe, that are deeply divided and have 10 electoral votes. Pennsylvania is a good example, and I think it has 20. Then if you have 5 more Democratic votes in Michigan than Republican votes for the candidate, instead of having the entire state go to all 10 electoral votes to the Democrat, then 5 go to the Democrat and 5 go to the Republican.
So what do you think, Bill?
So it's Maine and Nebraska that split. Nebraska has that one district which tends to vote Democratic. Let me deal with the Supreme Court, because the proposals around changing the direction of the Supreme Court do include term limits. And some of the proposals are very, very well developed and sophisticated. And some of the people behind the push for term limits include Erwin Chemerinsky, who's the dean at Bolt Law School. So these ideas have been thought through, and the way that it would be done generally is that you would have 18-year terms for each justice. After that, they would go on something called senior status, so that they would still maintain their position for life during good behavior as provided for in the Constitution. And theoretically, you wouldn't need a constitutional amendment, because otherwise you're talking about something that's really, really long and involved and probably not going to happen. So term limits, that's on the table. People are proposing that. And the more developed proposals include provisions that would allow every president to get to appoint someone to the bench. And they vary from, there are many different proposals out there, so I don't want to overgeneralize. As far as the other question, the Electoral College goes, yes, the states determine, they run their own elections, they certify their electoral votes, they can carve up their states into different Electoral College districts, as is done in Maine and Nebraska. But every state, I think South Carolina was the last, which that they all now allocate electoral votes based on the popular vote within their jurisdictions. That doesn't mean they can't carve up and do some sort of proportionality. That's an idea that's out there. I don't know how popular that is at the present time. But the Electoral College is one of the vestiges that the founders left us from the late 18th century, and it's terribly, terribly anachronistic. We'd be much better served by having the president elected by a national popular vote, because the president, after all, is unique in that the president is a servant of all the people. President represents everybody, not like a senator, not like a House member. And there's very good reason for the president to be elected nationally. That won't happen without a constitutional amendment. So this interstate compact probably is the best way to go, but that requires states to join the compact. And then I think, you have the problem of, okay, Arizona is going blue, so maybe we join the compact, but then if the Republicans take over again, they'll withdraw from the compact. So this is one avenue that could possibly alter the bad results of the Electoral College, because we are seeing more and more elections where a candidate with a minority of the popular vote gets to be elected president. And this last election, although Biden won nationally by 7 million votes, the votes in all these really close states, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, they were really close, within 20,000 votes in those 3 states. Bigger margins in Michigan and Pennsylvania. but a lot needs to be done. So there's a lot to put together for an agenda, a progressive agenda, and I think people are doing it.
Okay, so we're running behind. We're running late, so we've got Joseph Dowd. Professor Dowd, you wanted to say something else?
Okay, yeah, I already got to talk, so I'll try to be brief. I appreciated the responses to my initial question, but I wasn't just asking how we can try to scoop up some more working class votes, or how Democrats can scoop up some more working class votes. I was also asking, how can we kind of motivate or empower people who maybe are working class or maybe don't have a college education, empower more of them to take a kind of an active role or maybe even leadership roles among progressives. Because, I don't think we want a situation. I don't think we want a situation where like liberals or progressives, they're only being led by college educated kind of white collar types. Give an obvious example, right? If you're going to have a labor movement in a country, then you'd want that movement to be led by working class people of that country, right? And so that was another kind of prong to my question. How can we scoop up more votes, but how can we really kind of enthuse, right, working class people who the left is supposed to be on the side of, but supposed to represent, right? Supposed to care about. These are the people we're supposed to care. How can we get them to take a more proactive role within the Democratic Party or within progressivism in general?
I will take a stab at that again. I appreciate coming back to it. The only thing I'll say, first of all, of course, obviously, first of all, in Gen X, I'm a Gen Xer. I don't know if people have looked at the voting trends around Gen Xers, but it's been wretched. Okay. And I think we saw a very conspicuous gap in terms of left progressive leadership from Bernie Sanders down to AOC, skipping my generation. We all know that baby boomers had a great history of radical activism in their generation going back to the 1960s, and innumerable people from that generation remain engaged, not just with the political left, but with the electoral political left. In my generation, again, I was privileged to go, I'm from a middle-class household, but privileged to go to elite college. Very few radicals that I knew got involved in electoral politics in my generation. And then not inconspicuously, the protest movements that were sparked by Gen Xers, like the WTO demonstrations in Seattle, onto Occupy, were very non-hierarchical, extremely disengaged from electoral politics. And I think there was a great sense of alienation among left Gen Xers towards the Democratic Party. The working class and the progressive left. Okay, there's incredible wealth inequality in the society. Most people in the society are not in the 1%, of course. 90% of the population isn't. 90% of the population is outside of the top 10%. If you're 40 and under in the United States right now, if the election was determined by people 40 and younger, Bernie Sanders would have won in landslide. In fact, I think Bernie Sanders would have won the Democratic Party nomination and the national election comfortably if it's 50 and under. Okay, now among the people who were supporting Bernie Sanders, if you went to Bernie Sanders rallies in the past two election cycles, they were packed with young people, almost overwhelmingly not from the 1%, 10%, or top 25% of the economic balance sheet. And a lot of the people from that are leaders in the progressive movements across the country are from the broad working class. Sanders did very well in 2016 when even though in a sense he came closer this time to winning than he did last time. We all know that 2016 was much more drawn out. And so there were more states where the race was competitive between Hillary Clinton and Bernie did incredibly well in a number of red states. He crushed it in West Virginia. In West Virginia, there were very little presence of the national 1%, 10%, or top 25% of the election. And the people who came out of the Sanders movement as progressive leaders in all of these states were, again, younger, they skewed younger, and they are of the working class. So I don't think it's quite as dire as it looks, especially when you start looking at age demographics.
Okay, in fact, some hope for my generation, in other words.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Your generation gets it like mine did not, okay? But it's a huge country, and there's a lot of, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of even progressive Gen Xers. It's a big country. But real hope there. And the amount of youth activism between the climate and coming off of the successive Sanders movements. And even, there was some grassroots support, not a lot for some of the other candidates, but they also are mixing in. You look at Working Families Party that supported Warren. Their rank and file is pretty young too.
Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to have another meeting hopefully next month, and we're going to be developing a pro-democracy movement in the United States. And so stay in touch with everybody. And thank you very much, Bill and Alan, for being here. You were both great, fantastic comments from everybody. Thank you, everybody. So remember, our first assignment is HR 1, call your rep, and support Nancy Pelosi's Truth Commission. Those are our two things we're going to do this month, and also all the other stuff PDA does and all the stuff you guys all do. I appreciate it. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you. Great job. Bye now. This has been Bible Study for Progressives. If you enjoyed the program, please subscribe to our podcast, or put us in your favorites and write a 5-star review. Tell your friends about us and share us on social media. Follow us on Facebook and click the donate button at modernlectionaries.blogspot.com. Your support will help us reach more people, produce more and better shows, and cover the cost of production. Feel free to send me a note or comment on the show. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, this is Rich Procida. Thank you for listening.